White House losing a court battle over the release of the president's financial records, and this ruling could be a pivotal one as the battles continue between Donald Trump and the Democrats. Then we take a look at the politics surrounding the Mueller report, including the ratcheting up of impeachment. Also, anger, it is growing in our area as well as across the country over the assault on a woman's right to choose. We're going to take you live to a rally, one of many today, and we'll be speaking with some women who are livid about what's going on. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Now, this morning at 10 o'clock, the House Judiciary Committee, they held a hearing that was supposed to feature former White House counsel Don McGahn. But Mr. McGahn was a no-show. The White House, they told him not to show up, and the Justice Department backed them up, saying McGahn has immunity. But Chairman Jerry Nadler, he was there, and he vowed to hear from Mr. McGahn. Take a listen to the New York Congressman.
This committee will hear Mr. McGahn's testimony, even if we have to go to court to secure it. We will not allow the president to prevent the American people from hearing from this witness.
Plus, there are new questions about whether we will hear from the man himself. I'm talking about Bob Mueller. CNN reporting today that Mueller's team, they're reluctant to have Mueller testify because they're concerned he will appear to be too political. Nadler, however, is saying he will eventually subpoena Mueller if he has to. So, as they say, stay tuned. Now, those just a couple of the many battle lines happening in Washington as we speak. Here's another one. A federal judge has just sided with the House Oversight Committee. Now, that panel, they issued a subpoena to try to get access to Trump's accounting firm, requesting financial information dating back several years. The president, well, his attorneys, they're appealing. The most notable part of this case, it could be the judge's comments. I want to read a portion of them. Quote, "It is simply not fathomable that a constitution that grants Congress the power to remove a president for reasons including criminal behavior would deny Congress the same power to investigate him for unlawful conduct, past or present, even without formally opening an impeachment inquiry. The court is well aware that this case involves records concerning the private and business affairs of the President of the United States. But on the question as to whether or not to grant the stay pending appeal, the President is subject to the same legal standard as any other litigant." And joining us now is former federal prosecutor Andrew Cherkasky. And Andrew, a lot to chew on here, but let's start off first with not only the judge's ruling, but the rationale as to why. Basically, he's saying the president is not king. Talk about the significance of not only the ruling, but the rationale and the fact that under appeal, it's going to go to a judge by the name of one Merrick Garland.
So what we have here is a decision that obviously is very good for the Democrats in Congress and something that I think a lot of constitutionalists really saw coming from a ways away. But it's nothing new. And the judge in this case started with a history lesson talking about President Buchanan having a similar fight with Congress over 100 years ago. In that case, they were talking about laws that were set up to investigate the president and his surrounding actions and conduct. Here, it's no different. Congress and the president have long had this battle. And what the judge in this case ultimately said is that where legislation could be had, there is a legitimate legislative purpose for issuing subpoenas like this. This judge is signaling broad authority for the legislature to get access to really any sort of documents or individuals, even through a subpoena, that could have information that could help them legislate.
You know, Andrew, it may be dangerous, but I've been reading up on Buchanan, as you mentioned. I've also read what happened with Andrew Johnson. If you closed your eyes, you'd swear the same conversation they had then relating to impeachment and today is apropos, and certainly got precedent with Nixon with the tapes. Isn't a lot of this settled law that we have precedent, that we do have co-equal branches, and that Congress's role is not just oversight, but including investigating a president? A lot of people are treating this like it's uncharted territory, and some of it might be, but a lot of it we've gone through in American history.
Exactly. It's something that we see maybe every 20 or 25 years, on a bigger scale, maybe every 50 or 75 years. So the law on these topics may be dated in the regard to the number of years since it's been challenged, but really the constitutional interplay between Congress and the president has always been closely monitored by the courts, and they've engaged in active three-branch type of constitutional setup. So this is not something new. It is something that presidents for really the history of America have challenged in terms of the amount of oversight that Congress can have, because regardless of the party that is in the executive branch, if the opposite party is in the legislature, it's going to be a very contentious relationship. So that is always something that has been fought. But the courts have tended to lean towards Congress having that oversight capability.
Maybe I had this wrong, but I was always under the impression, Congress subpoenas you, like it or not, get ready to raise your right hand here and be on C-SPAN, or if it's bigger, even the networks. McGahn, now he's being told not to go, even though the guy spent 30 hours with Mueller. Now all of a sudden this executive privilege doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Hope Hicks, we just learned today, she's subpoenaed as well. When did subpoenas become optional as to whether to observe or not?
That's a great question, and I think that it is outrageous for Trump and the rest of the administration to call the privilege, the executive privilege, some sort of absolute privilege. The idea that you don't even have to show up. This is something that happens day in, day out in criminal courts across America. Somebody gets a subpoena, they don't think they have information to give, or they think that they have a privilege, whether that privilege is some sort of attorney-client privilege, whether it's a spousal privilege. There are other privileges that are just as strong as the executive privilege. They still have to show up, they still have to raise their right hand, and they need to say to the judge, often outside the presence of a jury, they need to say that there's a privilege that they're asserting. What that judge is then going to do is they're going to thread the needle about what the privilege applies to and what it doesn't apply to. Mr. McGahn may have a great deal of executive privilege that will prevent certain types of testimony, but not everything he knows is under the executive privilege.
I want to backtrack 1 second to the Mazars case, and that, for everybody who doesn't know, that's the accounting firm in question. We also know, certainly with Deutsche Bank, there's a lot of outstanding questions as to why red flags were waved, and then higher ups at the bank said never mind, as it related to Trump and some of the financial relationship there. To that end, and the tax returns, obviously I'll put in the same bucket for this conversation, there's an argument the president's just trying to run out the clock, but take an educated guess, Andrew. How long can that clock run to? I could make an argument from a political standpoint only, looking at the calendar, better off dealing with this stuff in 19 than dealing with it in 2020 when you're closer to the general election in November. What is the strategy here and the likelihood that the returns will be made available? Again, I think there's black letter law on this, and then also from both the accounting firm and then also from some of the questions with Deutsche Bank and some of the other financial institutions. Are we going to see this stuff, and when do you think the courts will finally say yes or no?
Well, we're really seeing that in this recent case that it moved pretty quickly. By my count, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks. I can't give that a specific, but that's going to be kind of the pace that we continue to see this with. I think the appellate court's going to act very quickly on this as well. I think that the courts are going to move even more quickly as there are future challenges that kind of look exactly the same as the past challenges. So in terms of running out the clock, yeah, I think that it's going to get it much closer to the election time frame. I don't think that it's going to push it past the election. The political risk for both sides is, what is that information really going to say? Because there is the real potential this is more of the same of what America knows of President Trump. And just like there hasn't been outrageous sort of reaction to the tax returns from over 20 years ago that we recently saw, perhaps there's not going to be any sort of real outrage over this if it comes up right in the election cycle, and it may not hit that hard for the Democrats.
Andrew, a little earlier we were going through the Founding Fathers' idea of the government and the checks and balances, and the idea that there would be oversight and that we wouldn't have a king in this country, because that was one of the reasons they left where they came from to come here and have the premise of democracy. So let me move my civics lesson or schoolhouse rock to the second point, which is the Justice Department. Now, next segment, I'm going to be talking with somebody about military pardons, because there's a pretty well-documented rumor out there that for the Memorial Day weekend upcoming, the president could issue multiple pardons for war criminals. And we've already seen the president say, yeah, I don't have to report to you, Congress, and I don't have to acknowledge subpoenas or be cooperative in any way, shape, or form. You report to me, not the other way around. Now we get reports the president even said to Politico it's within his purview and it may even be appropriate if he wants to have the Justice Department investigate Joe Biden, who just happens to be, at this point, the most likely opponent that he'd face in a general election. I mean, we are in a weird place here that I think we are all so used to craziness as the norm. But the idea that a president would use DOJ to investigate political enemies or challengers, but yet say that he's above the law himself, am I wrong? Are we going to look back one day and say, what the heck was going on in 2019?
I think that what you have to remember before you even start to talk about the idea of the president's involvement in the Justice Department is that the Justice Department is not part of the judicial branch of government. It is part of the executive branch of government. It is just another department of the president's. So the president has great authority and discretion in how it directs and controls any of its departments, whether that's the Department of Defense, whether it's the Homeland Security, whatever department it is. Certain presidents take more interest in others. Often we've seen historically the president takes a great deal of interest in controlling the Department of Defense. So the Department of Justice and him putting a heavy hand on it, not inappropriate. Here's what's inappropriate. When you start getting involved in the investigation of political opponents for a political purpose, that is likely going to run afoul of the law. And it may or it may not be the Justice Department that ends up investigating the president, but he may see himself definitely in the crosshairs of impeachment if he is misusing his branches of government for a political purpose, essentially establishing a mafia-type hit through a government agency.
Just think of the sentences we're saying here, and that somehow, some way, Andrew, this has become our new normal. But I always appreciate you trying to make sense out of the nonsensical. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everybody. When we come back, the president, he's considering pardoning more war criminals. And wait until you see the crimes they're accused and even convicted of. And trust me, this got a lot of veterans more than a little upset. One of them, he'll join us after the break.